Okay. Tiny glitch in the paperwork for the lunches. It said 12:30 instead of 11:30, but that's okay. Everybody have your lunch? All right. Now that we have enough attention. So for today's Working Group Chairs Forum, I'm not sure why I put this up here, but I do believe we're streaming it with Meet Echo, so I thought we'd better cover the fact that you are still at the IETF. So this is our agenda for today. I would like, if there's any possibility of somebody taking notes, I know Miriam's going to take some, and we would like a second person taking notes. Are there any volunteers to do that? Volunteers? All of you are working group chairs, and you know how hard it is to get a volunteer to take notes, and yet none of you volunteer. Okay. Right. Well, but somebody said it's hard to take notes when you're eating. Well, that is true. Okay. So the agenda for today is we're going to go over the working groups, the website update from Greg. We're going to hear from the GitHub BOF folks, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the education and mentoring activities going forward. So Greg.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, better. Okay, my name is Greg Wood. I've been working with several folks on this IETF website revamp, and the goal of today's conversation is really, there are really a couple of them. One is just to make sure that you all know where we stand.
You need to eat that microphone.
I will eat the microphone.
Take it out of the stand and hold it.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Greg Wood. I've been working with a lot of good folks on the IETF website revamp, and I wanted to talk with you all today for just a little bit. There are a couple of goals that I have in mind. One of them is to just give an update of where we are on this project, which was started a while ago and has been making steady progress recently, sort of accelerating. So where are we? Number two is to maybe prompt you all to start thinking about providing some input and review. But then the third one is to just sort of check in with you to make sure that where we are is kind of on track in terms of what the IETF community needs from the website. So I'll run through pretty quickly. I'm hoping to have a number of minutes at the end of this to have some questions and some discussion. And certainly this is just the first, or one of the first opportunities. So this isn't, this is just a beginning. So I wanted to start things up by just prompting some questions at the beginning so you can have them in mind as we get through the presentation. They're on the site here, and they sort of mirror some of the, or on the slide here, and they sort of mirror some of the questions that we asked at the initial phase of research that was done to help provide direction for where the website should evolve to. You can read them here, and I'll put them up again at the end of the presentation that I have to make. Just a real quick compressed version of the history. So I think it's almost 2 years ago now, actually. We started drafting a scope of work that was shared with on the IETF at IETF list, got some really good input, and worked with the IAOC Technology Management Committee. I sort of just say the Tools Committee, but I think that's the official name. to work through the actual scope of work, which is posted on the IAOC site, and make a selection on the vendor, which is Torchbox. There's also a link to them, I think, on the IAOC site. And then part of that scope of work was to establish a community review committee. So the idea was to have sort of an ongoing sounding board for the project that would be provide some immediate feedback and correction if needed for how the work was progressing. And so that has worked pretty well. I think you saw from Yari's note earlier this week, or last week, I guess, that Joe Hildebrand was the initial project manager and did a lot of great work, and now Russ Housley has taken over as the project manager. So yeah, so the last thing, as I mentioned, one of the first steps also was, once we got the vendor in place, is to do some research to figure out what was working and what wasn't working based on the requirements set forth in the scope of work. And part of the requirements were that the IETF website had some very specific, the www part specific, I should say. One of the things is that the work is scoped www.ietf.org, and there are a lot of other web assets or web presence that we know that the IETF community specifically uses. So like Data Tracker or others. But this project is specifically scoped on www.ietf.org. The other thing we did was talk to the three audiences that are specified in the scope of work is active participants, so folks like you, folks who come to IETF meetings, who participate on mailing lists, who are actively engaged, who already know about the IETF. Potential participants, so people who are either working in the technical areas that the IETF covers, or perhaps people who are considering or working there, or so forth. And then the last are people who will never ever participate in the IETF, but who need to know what the IETF does and why it's important. So here you might think about telecom regulators or people involved in other parts of the sort of internet governance world. So those are the kinds of folks we had in mind. I'm sorry? Professors' wives, yeah, or your family members, right? So like, why are you spending all this time in Chicago? Yeah, so those kinds of folks. Audience research findings. So yeah, so there's a longer version of this, but this is just sort of a summary of the summary, and I think these 3 points were representative of sort of the broad set of interviews. Just a real quick back note about the research. Most of it relied on interviews with people who sort of came from those 3 audiences, so as well as some sort of best practices benchmarking across other organizations. And you can read it there again, but in short, it's basically the current website, again, www, sort of serves a very limited set of users, and I think really it's the people who already knew about the IETF.org, the IETF, that significant improvements could be made to make sure that it serves the broader community. And another part in here that isn't highlighted, but I think is represented in the design you'll see, is that really the focus needs to be on the work of the IETF, right? So that is, the work of the IETF is its distinguishing characteristic, and so we shouldn't lose that. There was some discussion on the mailing list, for example, when the scope of work was circulated, that we should be sure that the IETF website, the www presence, doesn't devolve into a marketing flash dependent kind of website, right? It has to reflect the actual ethos of the IETF itself. We shouldn't lose that. So now I'm going to go into screenshots. So these are just sort of before, and before is the current IETF website as of, I think, probably a week and a half ago or 2 weeks. It might be slightly different, but it's representative. And the after is sort of the mock-up of the website as proposed. And these are screenshots that actually were shown earlier, I think last year, for example, and to the community. And earlier we actually had the vendor on site at an IETF meeting to have interactions with IETF participants. So so these haven't changed much, but just a reminder what it looks like. Another example, one of the requirements of the scope of work is that the website needs to work better on different kinds of devices with different sized viewports. The current site.
I hope that's backwards.
Oh, I did. Yeah, I switched it. You're right. So never mind. Time is linear. We didn't go back in time. Yeah. So the labels are switched, but you can easily tell, as you noted, which is before and which is after. And this is an example from the blog specifically. And then lastly, this is just an example of an event page, also label switched. This is what you get when you try and improve your slides just before the session. But you can see kind of a different look, a little different feel, and works better on different devices. Now we'll see if this actually works. I don't know how well this is going to work because I was sort of expecting a different setup, but I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is on a development server, and the screen resolution actually of the projector is not ideal, but it does show the responsiveness of the website. So my planned walkthrough might not work so well, but I'll show you one thing. My email client. Yeah, so this is an example. This is kind of one of the examples that I'll give, and probably the only one, so for time. Well, that didn't really work as I expected. But one of the features of this, one of the features that the vendor suggested is to tie directly into Data Tracker to provide information about things like RFCs and internet drafts and working groups, so that people can get in the larger version of this, that people can get previews of those elements in the www site. So the idea is to really tie those two parts together in a way that not only provides current information, but also makes the point that IETF is about getting the technical work done and drawing people into the tools that are actually used by the IETF participants. I know we're short on time. Let me just skip ahead here. So what's next? So we're doing some show and tell at the IETF. There's a table down by the IETF registration. And I think there's one more. We've been there a couple of times. I think there's one more session yet this week. It's either tomorrow morning or Friday morning. I need to check my calendar, and I'll be there, and we can play with the website. So I encourage you to come by if you have time to do that. Otherwise, based on the feedback that we're getting both from IETF participants, but also testing with the other audiences, we're going to start reviewing and revising the current setup. Once we'll also revise content, not only the sort of the CMS and technical side of things, but the content as well, to make sure it's working for everybody. And then once we're satisfied with that, we'll move to production. So hoping that will be done before the next IETF meeting, but the goal is to get it right. So definitely going to depend on the feedback that everybody provides. And with that, that's the end of my slides. I'm going to go back to the questions.
Oh, yeah. Can you just put up the questions that you had for the working group chairs? So part of the reason for doing this in this particular forum was this this community represents the experienced IETFers. And one of the things that we're looking for is how exactly do experienced IETFers actually use the website, and is the information that they, or do you possibly not use it very much? I mean, do you primarily use data tracker? So what are you looking for in the website? Anyway, so with that, are there any questions for Greg or any comments, feedback?
One comment, one question. So I think when you listed the audiences, we were number one. We shouldn't be. I would say potential IETF participants and just the rest of the community should be number one, and not us. And then a question: is search engine optimization in scope for the project?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Is search engine optimization, SEO, is it in scope of the project? Because if you look up security standards or networking standards, and actually if you type IETF on Google, what comes up is IETF member, even though there are no IETF members.
Yeah, I think the answer to your question is no, but certainly it's something we could look at, following on to the overall goal of making sure potential participants find the right information. Short answer is no.
Okay, great.
Rick Taylor, just to answer one of your questions, I go straight to the data tracker for my day-to-day chair stuff. The only time I use the IETF.org site is to work out where the hotel is and how to do that. And it's a pain to find at the moment. So improvements are great. And that's as a chair what I use it for. But I'm just a chair.
Okay. Thank you.
David Buck, one of the things that I do use the IETF site for is the existing site has a set of links down the left column. It's very easy to tell people, just go to IETF.org and click on this link to do that.
Yeah, thank you. We've heard that.
Tim Chan, yeah, +2. I was just about to say the same thing. That left pane there is so useful. Things like submitting a draft and all the little quick links are there that are handy. So I think this is great to have a nice public front, as long as everything from the data tracker and those points of things are there behind it, and we've got that path in. That's great. So it looks like really good work. My key question is, though, I'm still not sure. I've not seen anything about this until today. Where do we go to actually see these mock-ups and to give you some feedback? Is that possible yet? You said you wanted feedback, but I've no idea still where to go and give it.
Yeah, I think we're still working that out, the exact feedback mechanism, but it'll either be, obviously there'll be an email address, but there might be other ways to do it as well, and we'll provide more feedback. Part of the process, I think, is to provide early access to the community, to the site, so they can poke around.
Yeah.
But I take your point. We'll make it clearer exactly how that is done, probably next couple of weeks.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you.
Tim, just a real quick question. Are you talking about feedback this week or feedback after this week? Because he does have the table downstairs for feedback this week.
I was completely unaware there's another, I don't know what table you're talking about. Sorry.
Right. So,
yeah, the table is right by the IETF registration desk, and I can send a note out to this list to let folks know.
If there is such a thing, it might be good to make it clearer that it exists, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that's missed that.
right.
So, well, I actually like the old-fashioned one. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned and grey-haired and stuff. So how about we have two front pages, one for those people, for the public, as it were, and one for the very experienced IETFers who just want to go straight there for example, clicking the button to book the hotel, which is sort of one of the most urgent tasks you have to do 3 times a year.
I wonder if that's a data tracker feature.
Sorry? Yeah, within 7 minutes. No, I mean, a lot of us actually go there to get close to meeting times to do that, and yet it seemed to be hidden below hackathons being as important as standards.
So I agree. My number one use of the first page is as a jumping off place to a lot of places. It's just a very, very nice compact index, and I would hate to lose that.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that having that same sort of compact set of quick links to places that are often used by regular participants is a very handy thing, and we should figure out a way to make that readily available.
And please don't forget to announce your name, please.
Justin Dean. I would like to second the comment about that we shouldn't be the main target audience for the front-facing website. I like what you had to say, Stuart, about having a place that we can go to quickly get to everywhere we need to get. But I think the front-facing part of it should focus on potential working group contributors and specifically getting them the info they need to participate and make it easy. And I would say that would be teaching them about the IETF process, teaching them about how they can contribute either by submitting a draft or contacting the people they want to contact to participate. So mailing lists and such and how that works. And the third would be how to get to RTs and do implementations and that sort of thing. So I would focus on that on the front-facing part.
Okay, thank you very much.
So Stuart Bright, I'm glad you picked up on the left-hand side, but right-hand side, about sort of a third of the way down from the top, is everything you need to know for the meeting. So click on there and you get to the meeting notes, the hotels, everything you want. That also needs to be on the front page.
Yeah, definitely got it.
Spencer Dawkins. So I live in the data tracker. I'm not a great candidate. My biggest frustration is not just the hotel, but all the meeting links change from 97 to 98. I would be happy to have bookmarked stuff in IETF 52, to get to the next meeting or register or something like that, if those links still worked for 98. But since they move, then we have to navigate the thing. So it would be helpful for me if there was some stable thing I could bookmark and have it redirect.
Yeah, I think that's a neat comment. One thing I failed to mention in terms of the scope of work, but I probably should, is that for well-known URLs, those are required to remain workable. So even though the particular parts of the site may move, the URLs that are well-known and publicized should.
Yeah, right. So I mean, that's basically saying if you click on it, is it still there? And this is if I wanted to register for IETF 52, I'm in good shape.
Yeah. I hear you saying something slightly different and get that. Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alexander Pelov. Two very short remarks. The first one is on I'm completely agreeing and that we should focus on the target here. So facilitate the life of people coming, and this actually for me is much more than just the web design. So it is actually looking at what facilitates people discovering the links and so forth and discovering the information. And for me, this is like completely different. I mean, this is the first thing to do, and then the design comes afterwards. So that's the first thing to do. And the second thing is that I would really like to avoid the IETF site becoming one of all the websites that are alike, that are, like all these consortia, all these alliances with some default one scroll down page and so forth, right? Because there is a spirit in the IETF website as it is right now. So you may like it or not, but it's not like it is one of all the stock website designs that you go and buy for $20. So I would like for us to have something like this.
Yeah, thank you.
John Scudder. I guess you have to eat the mic, but I don't. Yeah, I wanted to add one thing to the previous comments about the quick links, which is I've recently suffered through redesigns of various other web presences that I make frequent use of, and they seem to have a common theme of the designer in charge of it takes a look at it and says, oh dear God, this is a wall of text. It's really intimidating. I'm going to take the wall of text and disappear it and, turn it into some kind of gradual drill down, cascading menus, blah, blah, which, it does make it look nicer, but I really like the wall of text. because I can grep the wall of text. You know, I know the thing I want is there somewhere, put it into my browser search thing, boom, and you know, it highlights exactly what I need. I don't really care if it's on the front page, as long as I can get to it by clicking on one thing, and then I can get to my wall of text.
John, can I just ask a question?
So
John,
just-
he
I was
wants to ask John a
interested
question,
to-
and this is the
question.
last person I've
Okay.
cut off the queue.
So how often do you go to the www site?
Oh, well, except for you.
Probably weekly.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much.
And I would answer that like 3 or 4 times a week. And you talked about well-known URLs. The point is the URLs are not well-known. They are well-used. And we need ways to get to those things because we don't keep them all on our brain.
Yep.
Alyssa Cooper. I just wanted to plant one additional seed in people's heads while you're thinking about this. Something that Greg and I have discussed at some length. The other thing that we don't have on either the current website or the new website is any way to track usage, like none whatsoever. So we don't know how many people visit the website, which pages are most frequently visited, the path by which people arrive at the site, like whether they actually do search and eventually find the page you're looking for, or whether they just go to the home page and navigate. We don't have any of this information. And that's for a bunch of historical reasons, very real concerns about privacy and which kind of tracking technology would we use and where would the data go and so on and so forth. But even after we go through this process and hopefully eventually, deploy the new site, we won't have an ongoing way of being able to determine, whether it's really meeting its goals other than, obtaining qualitative feedback from people. So I personally think that there is a way that we could add some usage tracking that is privacy friendly and gives people the ability to not have their own data involved in the usage tracking if they don't want to, and so on and so forth. And there's some available tools that do this. But if people, I think this is a good crowd to kind of benchmark that intuition. So if people have feelings about that one way or the other, it would be interesting to hear those on the working group chairs list after this, after the meeting, or if you go home and think about it, or as you're looking at the new site. So would appreciate feedback on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a
Thank you
really
very
good
much.
point. Thank you, Greg. Paul?
So, hi, blank screen. I'm Paul Hoffman from ICANN. Many of you came to the WUH or WU or WUFBOF on Monday, WGH. So I'm going to give a brief overview of that, sort of open it up, and then you will tell us when the mic line is going to be closed because everyone has opinions about GitHub. But what I want to emphasize is that one of the prime goals of the BOF was not to hear people's opinions about using GitHub, but to try to get people to ask questions and talk about tools and such like that. The basic idea is this, that there are some working groups that are heavily reliant on GitHub, where they're doing almost everything through GitHub. There are a bunch of working groups where GitHub is not used at all. And there's a bunch in the middle where maybe 1 or 2 documents is on GitHub. Maybe it's the working group has a few documents on GitHub, but maybe it's just the authors who are using GitHub on their own and such like that. There's a wide variety of usages, and they're sort of all valid, but there are some problems with the usages, and so we had 2 presentations. So I hope everyone actually looks at the presentations that were given in the BOF. They're on the tracker already. One of them was by Mark Nottingham, which wasn't about GitHub in specific. It was about working groups using tools and what are sort of the requirements, what do you need to get from them, because every tool is there to make something better, and every tool that makes something better makes something worse, and you hope that that there is an increase on one side or the other. And GitHub has a very sharp learning curve, so it had better also have a fairly sharp benefit curve as well. And then second presentation Well, actually, the first presentation was me, where I did a roll call. I had asked people on the mailing list, how are you using GitHub? So I did a roll call. So Mark's was the second presentation. Third presentation was Martin Thompson, whose name I've spelled wrong now approximately half the time, specifically about using GitHub in working groups. And the interesting thing there is that both Mark and Martin pretty much know each other through GitHub in HTTP BIS, which is the one working group which is using it all the time. They have their working group page there, very, very heavy, GitHub commitment, and yet the two of them disagree on a fair number of the usages. So, which again shows that, when we do tools, not everyone likes the way we do tools and such like that. So then there was a lot of open mic time, which actually went surprisingly well, given that this was a bunch of opinionated people, and this was about tools. So the biggest concern that came up during the mic conversation, if I can synthesize it, because it came from many people, is this. We have mailing lists currently, which is where we have discussion. Once you start using GitHub, it adds not one, but two additional places where discussion might happen. If you're not familiar with GitHub, the easiest thing to know is GitHub has its own issue tracker. So just like pre-GitHub days, when working groups had their mailing list and using tracking in the track tracker from the tools team, now there was two places you could have it. And how do you coordinate them? So this is a known problem that preceded GitHub. But GitHub has an additional place, a very attractive place for having conversation, which are pull requests. And if you're not familiar with a pull request, if you ever told somebody online, send text, pull request is the easy way to send text. It's actually not easy to get the text into the pull request, but it makes it trivial for the authors to accept the text. But there is discussion in pull requests as well. So you can say, please change from to to, and do that as a pull request. And anyone can comment on that saying, and even though it goes in the exact place where you want it in the draft, and it's easy to see in the diffs, someone can say, you're being Anglo-centric, we should actually use a different word. No, we shouldn't, you're just trolling, And so now we have three places for conversation to happen. And so the folks at the mic line the biggest concern was, how do you know where to go look at the conversation without having to go to all of these? Plus, are we losing some of the value of having all of the conversation in a place where we can replay it easily, meaning the mailing list? So there are tools that might be able to be used with that but that was really the big concern. The second biggest concern, I thought, was the fact that because there's a learning curve for GitHub, and it's very non-trivial. I mean, if you're going to use GitHub with Git, then now you have two sharp learning curves. But even if you're using GitHub without Git, the user interface is a little bit daunting. It was clearly written for programming geeks, which we are not all programming geeks. And in fact, for what we're using this for, it's actually for documentation. As you're writing documentation, you have different concerns about collaboration than you do when you are talking about programs. So for those of you who don't know, Git was developed for the Linux kernel. In fact, there was a hilarious tweet this morning that says that GitHub looks like something that was designed by the guy who designed the Linux kernel. Because, if you don't know it, they're sort of keeping you out. Once you know it, you're on the inside. What this means is that, and there is a huge class of people who understand GitHub, who are outside the IETF. I mean, it's not an IETF tool. It really is very popular in the programming world. So there's a huge class of people who know it, who actually have started coming into the IETF process because they search in the GitHub search thing for something that they're doing, especially if they're programming something and they are not our level of network programmers, but they are network programmers. They find an internet draft that is something about what they write. They start reading and they go, oh, this is wrong. And I know this is wrong because I'm having the problem. That's why I'm here now. And they suggest text, which is the normal thing to do in GitHub. They suggest text. This is like the perfect thing. These are the kind of people we want. But by inviting those people in, if we are becoming GitHub centric, we are also estranging the old farts who think that mailing lists are the right way to do things. And so there is somewhat of a culture clash. It's not an either or thing, but if we make it not an either or thing, now we have multiple places to discuss it. So, can we use GitHub to bring in new people and to make the current people more effective? Or should we not be using this as a tool so much and such like that? So that was some of the other mic lines. So that's my summary of what happened. It was only an hour-long BOF, which was good. It is not a working group forming BOF. Both Mark and Martin's drafts may or may not move forwards depending on if they feel like it. This isn't meant to be the new process document because a lot of people, in fact, a lot of working groups will probably never use GitHub. And some working groups will dive in heavily. It is really sort of an orthogonal tool to the way we're thinking. But as working groups want to start using it, how can we leverage the knowledge of the other folks who are already using it and such like that? So I assume I still have some mic time?
Yeah, tiny bit.
Okay, great, tiny bit, please.
All right, Mahesh. So my question is there any way to cross-post whatever is happening in GitHub onto the mailing list?
Yes, so the answer is yes, but it needs additional tools, some of which have been written by people in the IETF.
Pete Resnick.
I'm relying on you to.
Right, I will.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And to follow up on that, because I just started using it for Meeting Venue, and so I'm getting a constant stream of mails for the things I'm subscribed to, so I can see how it would go in that direction. Is there a way to go back the other way?
Meaning?
If I reply to something on the mailing list, it goes back as a comment on the right thing in GitHub.
There are tools for that, but it's a smaller number of tools.
Can I ask a favor? Instead of doing like a tutorial or what I'd really like to talk about is how we use it. Do we need tutorials going forward? Those kinds of things, as opposed to troubleshooting GitHub problems.
Rick Taylor, my question isn't about GitHub, it's about GitHub. Why? I went to the BOF, it was fascinating, some really good questions, but should we be looking at using a third party to host all this, or can we just look at the best practice that everyone loves at GitHub and say, great, we've got Track. Yep. Track does tickets. Track does Git integration. I mean, I run it back home.
Okay.
Why don't tools host Git, and we can get some extra stuff. We're doing an IETF website uplift. Perhaps we can get the web guys to get some of this basic stuff done and do it in house.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer that, that goes back to Mark's presentation on additional tools. Have we sort of over magnified on that one? And I mean, we can't have that discussion here, but yes, there is that question. So going to your question though of, what else is needed and such, is there a feeling that tutorials are needed? Or is there a feeling that we have too many different levels at once? So anyways, Mike Line.
So Paul, thank you. That's a good summary. I think I wanted to add one value piece that isn't in the tutorial land yet, because we haven't just talked about how it can add to the process. My experience has been that doing the document development in a revision control system has immense value when you get to the end of a complicated document, particularly like last call stage, when new people come in and they say, what about X? And what we've always done is somebody says, oh, we talked about that, find it in the mailing archive somewhere. And now you go to the document, you git blame, you find out what changes that went in, you find an issue with a discussion threaded just to that topic, and it's a much more defensible process and helps you check your own assumptions. One tiny little how-to nit, really commonly these documents are just in Markdown, and you can just make suggestions right through the GitHub interface. You click the edit button, and people do make typo corrections and send them off, and it's really easy peasy.
Yep.
So just as a note, we have about 3 minutes left for this conversation, so very concise.
Yep.
I would love more tutorials on how to use Travis, Circle, AutoBuild, and also the beauty that HTTP Biz has on their GitHub with the GitHub pages. It's beautiful, but hard to build.
Yep. Sure.
Yeah, I did a lot of work in on GitHub in W3C, and it worked so fantastically. I know there's problems, but it really vastly improves what you're doing. And to all of Patrick's points, with regards to tutorials, I'll second that. The Travis stuff would be great, but just a little bit of process for some new chairs getting started. I think it was Richard Barnes and Martin Thompson did a thing a while ago, and I asked them after that about what to name our repo. And what processes shall I do? Shall I do one repo for the whole
I think,
thing, or an account, or an organization? And so those kind of things would be great.
Right. So one of the outcomes of that particular one, because I chaired that one, was the question about the guidance to give people versus do we need not necessarily process, but do we need certain structures or certain rules for how people use a GitHub to do IETF stuff? And that was left as an open question then, and I do believe it's still sort of an open question.
Absolutely. So I know some people feel like those processes might limit some things. I would, as a newer chair, I would like those processes. It would have made
as an old chair, I would like those. Things so.
It would just be nice to say this is what you should name your organization. These are the people that should have access to it. These kind of things, just for people to get started.
How do you set it up in such a way that you guarantee the transparency that we want to ensure continues with IETF?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm violating my own conciseness.
Sorry about that.
So,
Ron Gondwana, I just wanted to, I guess, counter the idea of IETF running their own Git repository, our own Git repository, and own tooling around it. It's very insular compared to being on GitHub where other people can discover it. When we were talking about the website being discoverable to people outside the IETF, if we're using all in-house tooling, it's a lot harder for people in other communities to discover.
Okay, and I know you're going to answer that, so go ahead.
I don't have an answer for that. I just have a counter proposal. Are we going to do a nice tutorial on how working groups should use Facebook? It's the same thing. I mean, GitHub is a third-party organization. How does this work legally? When there's an issue, because there was a good boss question on that.
Follow Mark Nottingham's document, because that is the bigger picture on things like that.
Okay, I just feel there's a lot of enthusiasm, and I can see why, because there's great tooling. There's a lot of enthusiasm, but I just want to kind of pull the reins a little bit and say, I think we need to think about this a bit more.
So there's been plenty of reins pulling as well. The one thing that I would like to emphasize on this is that the reason we're doing this is to make our document processing better. And there are a wide variety of beliefs in how that happens. I mean, Patrick brought up a really interesting point, which is if you ignored GitHub, the way we've been doing in the past has worked for some things and has failed for others. Maybe GitHub fixes some of those or not, but we have to look at the big picture. So, great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all. I'd also encourage this particular conversation to continue on the working group chairs mailing list. So we're going to move really quickly through the next two pieces of the agenda, which was to talk about some of the education and mentoring activities, and also to talk about the newcomer stuff. So, well, do you know anyway? Sorry. So we do have a education and mentoring directorate that's been established now. This all went out on the notes so that you can read about it. The key thing that I wanted to talk about today is that there are a number of different projects that this entails, and a lot of this has to do with projects that are ongoing and already well underway. Under the sort of the grouping of education, we have tutorials, both face-to-face and online. We've had, in the last two IETFs, we have had a number of excellent tutorials. I'm really pleased with the way the tutorials are the direction that they're moving in. We can always use suggestions for new tutorials. I think about a year ago, Benoit in particular was telling us we need to do a better job of focusing on the technologies that the IETF is developing. I think the DNS privacy and quick tutorials both had excellent turnouts, and I think that's a reinforcement of the point there. Also, there's some ongoing document maintenance and text that's surrounded, and like Greg had the text about the IETF and things like that. Some of that needs to be moderated. Working Group Chairs Lunch Forum, well, that's this forum, and it's particularly your forum to do with as you wish, and so suggestions and volunteers to lead discussions on topics would be very welcome. One of the ones I thought would be really interesting to have is, I saw the discussion from Mark Nottingham, the email he sent to the Working Group Chairs list about the hybrid of the virtual and the physical. They did an interim meeting, and they did a really good job with facilitating remote participation during that interim meeting, and I think some discussion about how we do that better for all of us would be helpful. The second category of projects we have is what I'm currently calling newcomers outreach, and this is things like the newcomers meet and greet, and also the Secretariat does a dinner for newcomers. We have 2 mentoring programs right now. We have the speed mentoring, which if you haven't done this, I would strongly encourage you. It's only an hour, and it's not as painful as I originally imagined it would be. It's actually quite interesting. I did talk a former IETFer a current IETF for a long time, a friend of mine into doing this, and he said it was about 33% awkward and 66% okay. So, and he's a pretty shy guy, so I think it works much better than I ever imagined that it would, and it gives newcomers a chance to have a few faces. And then we had the regular mentoring program. The numbers in that have been going up, and you've been seeing a number of requests from Nalini on the mailing list for matches. I think we have between 20 and 25 this time. We had somewhere in the high teens last time. And one of our objectives is to do a little bit better job of reporting out some metrics on what all of these various programs are and how they're reaching people. There's a lot of activity. If you're following the VMeet mailing list, there's a bunch of activity around remote hubs and community hubs and those types of activities. And the final one on there is this assessment metrics and measurement. I'm not talking about a heavyweight metrics, but sometimes you need to be able to judge whether everybody lives in a world of limited resources. We need to be able to judge whether the programs that we're doing are effective or not, so that if they're not effective, we can modify them in such a way that we actually try to achieve our results. So I see Pete coming to the microphone. So that's the end of my really high-level overview of the Education and Mentoring Directorate. And Pete?
Yeah, so I got roped into the speed mentoring this time, and I agree with the assessment of it was probably 2/3 really good and 1/3 strangely awkward. But I've found the newcomers meet and greet not terribly effective, in part because newcomers tend to wander aimlessly, and in part because us old fogies tend to drink among ourselves. The amount of drinking is neither here nor there, but that we end up talking to each other, which is to be expected. Some way to hook those 2 events together, and maybe sort of, the nice thing about the speed mentoring was it forced us old fogies to talk to some of the newcomers immediately in a very controlled context, and having that slide into a more general social thing might make both more effective.
Okay. So you actually sort of did a foreshadowing of my next set of conversations, which was, okay, I just gave you a really high-level snapshot of what the education and mentoring activities are, and some of those are focused at newcomers and some of them are not. So now what I want to do is take a quick thread through what the newcomer efforts are, and I also want us to think about what are our objectives here? What are we trying to get out of the newcomers? And we'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, just sort of step through what the newcomer-related activities are. So first of all, there's the website, the online information. How does somebody who knows nothing about the IETF that plans to come get the information that they need? So a lot of the improvements there will come through the result of the website redesign. The next thing that they get is a newcomer email from the Secretariat, and the newcomer email from the Secretariat gives them pointers to a number of things, including things like the mentoring program, and tells them where to sign up and those kinds of things. So the next thing that impacts newcomers is the mentoring program, and this is the one where you actually sign up, you identify what you're interested in, and the mentoring coordinators match you with somebody from the IETF community who has similar interests. And you may develop, you may just exchange 1 or 2 emails or have a conversation, or you may develop a much deeper, relationship in the sense that in a more traditional mentor type of relationship. So the nature of those relationships vary depending on the pair of people you're talking about. The next thing that they would hit would be the newcomers tutorial, which Mike St. John's has been doing for the last couple of IETFs, doing a really nice job on that. The tutorial has been recast a bit. It's shorter than it used to be, and it's really more about pointing you to where you need to find the things that you need to do, and it's less about the long history of the IETF. That material is still all there, but the way the newcomers tutorial is currently being defined is slightly different than that. Then we have the speed mentoring, which we were talking about a little bit. And the real objective of this is not so much to match people with other people specifically related on interests or working groups, but basically to get folks talking to people in the IETF. And occasionally you'll make interesting connections. I know I've heard a couple stories from people this week who are very excited about being able to connect person A to person B based on the conversation they had in speed mentoring. So then the question, the newcomers meet and greet is next, and Pete completely teed up the conversation about the newcomers meet and greet. We were having a conversation about whether this is really a useful event or not, or is it really more a working group chairs social. And so the, which has valid purpose. I did also hear somebody say something about, refilling their glass of wine when it was free before they went to the regular reception where they had to pay for their wine. So that's another strategy for that. So we were going back and forth on what's the purpose of the newcomers meet and greet, and is it effective, and is it meeting that purpose or not? And one of the pieces of feedback that I did get, because I was leaning towards this is not really very effective, and the speed mentoring is doing more of what we actually want to do there. But the newcomers meet and greet, the speed mentoring is more about meeting in various random individuals, whereas the newcomers meet and greet is provided that you have the structure and you will reach out and do this. I'm interested in this working group chair, or I'm interested in this area director, and so you can pair them up that way in that context. Whereas you can't expect all of the working group chairs and all of the leadership to come to the speed mentoring. You get a much better chance of hitting the one person you are interested in if there's some sort of forum like a newcomers meet and greet. And then finally, the Secretariat orders a newcomers casual dinner, which is just basically do your own thing if you want to come kind of thing. So those are all the current newcomers efforts. So basically, what's the point? What are our objectives for facilitating newcomers? Do we want to increase the number of drafts? I'm not sure that you don't want to just increase the number of drafts. You want to increase the right kinds of drafts that are addressing the problems we're trying to solve. So you want, how do you measure whether that is a good thing or a bad thing? Increased volunteers for scribing, reviewing, editing, those kinds of things. Increased participation in working groups and increased attendance for revenue. So my question for you all, and given that it's 12:46 and we have about 4 minutes for this conversation, is what are some of the metrics for measuring how effective newcomer efforts are? And also, we've been very focused on the newcomer activities thus far in making the newcomers happy and meeting their needs. And so my question to the working group chairs is, what do you all need from newcomers? Or what do you wish they knew that they don't know? Or what do you wish, how could we make the newcomers that intersect with your working groups more effective? And there you have it.
Paul Hoffman, I want to go off slide here. Is there any effort to ask people who came to one IETF and don't come to the next one, or don't come to one for a year, why didn't they? And the reason I'm asking is that I think that the newcomers meet and greet works. I've had newcomers be very happy about it and such like that. And I think that overall, and by the way, I would certainly reverse your list here. Increasing attendance and participation is way more important, getting these people to be involved. Do we ever ask about why didn't you stay involved?
So what we have started doing, well, first of all, we expanded the definition of newcomers from one-time meeting to 5 meetings. And we have sent out, in previous ones, we've sent out various types of surveys. What we've done this time and last time is surveys to, we basically incorporated the newcomers portion into the main survey, and then we asked them which activities they were interested in. The next step for us is to take a look back at how many of these newcomers are staying and what are they doing. And we haven't actually pulled that data together yet, but we've spent a lot of time talking about, but I won't say we spent a lot of time talking about it. We really think we need to take a look at that particular aspect. Go ahead, Pete. Not Pete.
Hi, this is not
Sorry.
Pete. This is Barry.
I have two comments. One is about the newcomers meet and greet. I agree with Paul. I think it's effective, but I think what matters is whether the newcomers think that. But I've certainly talked with lots of newcomers at this one and most of them, and I've introduced them to the working group chairs and area directors that they're interested in seeing and that sort of thing. What I find the trouble with it is that it's always way too crowded to move around and often way too noisy to talk. And I had a thought. I don't know what the logistics would be, but we should look at the possibility of having most of the setup of the welcome reception done earlier and see if we can have the meet and greet in that room and transition
So
to the
I
welcome
completely agree with this. This is a problem that we have struggled with for a while, and we could talk about it further right now, but we only have 2 minutes.
Okay.
There's 4 people in
Well,
line.
I just threw out an idea so you can take that off. The
I
other-
would, go
The
ahead.
other is about the last question here, and one thing I think we could do, that we occasionally get newcomers who are ready to jump in and talk a lot, but we often get a lot of them who sit there quietly and are shy about it. And maybe working group chairs should ask at the beginning of the meeting, do we have newcomers in the meeting? See if a few people raise their hands and then encourage them to get up to the microphone and participate actively. I think we could make a
Oh, it
big
is.
difference by doing something like that.
Okay, so it is 12:51, and I was planning to end at 12:50. So we actually do need to vacate the room because there is another set of folks sitting here. I would love for the 4 of you in the line and anybody else to send whatever you were going to say to the working group chairs mailing list.
Okay.
And apologies, we'll have the lunches on time next time. So please vacate as quickly as possible and take all of your garbage with you. Thank you for that. That's kind of harsh. Oh, I see.
Carry out all my stuff.
Oh.
You're a little bit overly focused.